A fairly nondescript office block on the east side of Main Street in Hartford, Connecticut, stands on a site that was once home to a lively stretch of the city's street life. Businesses that once flourished here included a bazaar, saloons, restaurants, and a longtime home of the Hartford Times newspaper. Hi, this is History with me, Dan Sterner. And in this video we'll examine the colorful history of a lost block of Hartford's Main Street. At 740 Main Street, across from the Gold Building, stands an 11-story structure that's part of the Travelers Insurance Company complex. Sandwiched between two taller buildings, Travelers Tower, completed in 1919 to the south, and the old Hartford, Connecticut Trust Company building, completed in 1921, on the north, the Travelers Building at 740 Main has a minimalist design that acts as a foil to the ornate style of these two neoclassical neighbors. Completed in 1956 to plans by the New York architectural firm of Voorhees, Walker, Smith & Smith, the building matches the proportions of the adjacent base of Travelers Tower. Between these two buildings is an alley, now closed off by a fence, that used to be Grove Street and once extended here from Main Street eastward towards Prospect Street. Going back in time to the period depicted on John Warner Barber's plan of Main Street during the American Revolution, the area of the future 740 Main Street contained a number of old colonial-era properties. On the south, near the future Grove Street, was the home of John Chenevard, a sea captain of French Huguenot origins. In 1771, his widow Margaret advertised that she was selling choice Madeira and Lisbon wine, chocolate, indigo, molasses, rum, snuff, tea, etc. Just to the north was the homestead of John Butler, occupied by his widow Susanna. In 1773, part of the property was rented out to Hezekiah, Daniel, and George Merrill. They erected a store where Hezekiah sold medicines and books at the sign of the Unicorn and Mortar. Hezekiah Merrill also served as the first cashier of the Hartford Bank, established in 1792. By then, he had purchased the rest of the old Butler property, which he sold in 1789 to Oliver Ellsworth. Connecticut's first U.S. Senator, Ellsworth was appointed Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court by George Washington. Not long after the sale, a wooden 3-story gable-roofed building was erected on the site, pictured here in the 1880s. I'm not sure if it was initially a residence. Ellsworth also had a house in Windsor, Connecticut that's now a museum operated by the DAR. But it does resemble commercial structures erected in downtown Hartford in the early 19th century by Oliver Ellsworth's brother, Henry L. Ellsworth. Henry also put up a building just to the north at the corner of Central Row, a 4-story gable-roofed brick structure. It was known as the Central Row Building, and at one time housed the Hartford Museum and the offices of the Hartford Times newspaper, which was launched in 1817. In 1856, the Oliver Ellsworth Building was joined on the block by 3 4-story commercial buildings. These structures were Italianate in style, a mode of architecture that predominated in commercial construction in the city at the time. To the north, the Central Row block was replaced by the Hungerford and Cone buildings, a brownstone structure designed by Hartford architect Octavius Jordan. Just south of the Ellsworth Building was a 3-bay brick and brownstone building. Designed by architect Joseph Camp of Hartford, it was originally known as the Johnson Building because it was built on the site of the home of General Nathan Johnson, who had passed away in 1852. General Johnson, who served in the War of 1812, later became head of the state artillery. He also served in the Connecticut State House and Senate. His wife was Sarah Butler Merrill, daughter of Hezekiah Merrill. The Johnson Building's original tenants were the Hartford County Bank on the ground floor and the Charter Oak Life Insurance Company above. Among those who originally rented space in the top 2 floors of offices above was the architect Octavius Jordan. Just to the south, at the corner of Grove Street, where Margaret Chenevard had once sold wine and chocolate, was a bigger building. Erected between 1854 and 1856 and later enlarged, its primary purpose was to serve as the Hartford Post Office. I mentioned earlier that the post office had been located for a time at the corner of Central Row. It had then moved a bit further east to another building on Central Row, but then William James Hammersley, who served as postmaster, had a disagreement with the building's owner, David F. Robinson. So he partnered with Alfred E. Burr and Alonzo W. Burge to construct a new post office at the corner of Grove Street. Hammersley's partner Burr was the publisher of the Hartford Times, and that newspaper also moved into the new building. The post office would eventually move out in the 1860s, but the Times would remain here until it relocated to its new building on Prospect Street in 1920. In the years just before the move to Prospect Street during World War I, pedestrians passing by could stop and read the latest news in the newspaper office window or check the latest baseball scores, which were updated on a large scoreboard attached to the front of the building. If you are enjoying this video, please remember to subscribe to the channel. Numerous other companies and businesses occupied offices and retail space in these buildings over the years. In 1859, H.W. Conklin, a shirt maker, purchased the north half of the old Ellsworth building and opened Conklin's Bazaar, which was described as a great emporium and a complete gentleman's furnishing goods establishment. In 1866, he expanded the business into the south half of the building. According to a notice in the Hartford Current newspaper on September 19, 1870, quote, H.W. Conklin, Esquire, proprietor of the Bazaar, No. 264 Main Street, has, at the urgent request of many customers, resumed the horse clothing business in addition to the other branches of his trade. He has fitted up a room directly over his store and stocked it with a full and complete assortment of horse blankets, halters, etc. Everything in the way of horse clothing can be found, and the prices will be found as low, if not lower, than at any other house in the country. At the bazaar can also be found a full stock of gents' furnishing goods, elegant lavender kids, fancy soaps, traveling shawls, leather gauntlets, Lubin's extracts, the Nilsson scarf, undershirts and drawers, etc., and many other novelties too numerous to mention. It will pay to drop in and see the many nice things to be found at Conklin's Bazaar." Unquote. Conklin's Bazaar moved further up Main Street in 1881, where it remained in business for about another 4 years. By 1904, the business on the ground floor of the south half of the old Ellsworth building was F. Goodacre's Saloon. This half of the building was soon after acquired by Charles D. Scattergood. After his death in 1906, the Scattergood Company continued to operate a saloon and package store in the building. At some point, the building's first 2 stories were given a modernized facade. The north half of the building remained under separate ownership and was torn down in 1918 to be replaced with a new structure designed by Hartford architect Fred Walls. Travelers acquired the Scattergood property in 1919 and the neighboring Fred Walls building in 1930. The insurance company eventually replaced both structures in 1938 with a new 2-story business block designed by the architectural firm of Smith and Bazette of Hartford. This building had space for 3 stores on the ground floor. As for the 2 buildings next door, which are depicted here on September 7, 1868, when the funeral procession for former Connecticut Governor Thomas H. Seymour was passing by on Main Street. As I mentioned, they were acquired by Travelers, which moved one of its departments into the old Hartford Times building in 1920. 2 years later, Travelers acquired the Johnson building next door. At that time, the ground floor was occupied by L.A. Wiley & Sons art dealers, and the second floor had recently been vacated by the Oriental Restaurant. Above was the office of photographer F.F. Chuboda. So by 1930, Travelers owned all the property along Main Street between Grove Street and the Hartford, Connecticut Trust Company building at the corner of Central Row. Its property extended eastwards to Prospect Street, where in 1921 it had erected an 11-story building at the corner of Prospect and Grove. Designed by Don Barber, the architect of the neighboring Travelers Tower, the new building was planned to complement the tower. It has a cornice 1 story below its roofline to specifically match the cornice of the tower's base. Moving forward to the mid-1950s, when the old Times, Johnson, and 1938 Travelers buildings were demolished and replaced by the current building, the new structure was designed to connect to the 1921 building to the east on Prospect Street. As I mentioned, at this time, Grove Street between Main and Prospect, which once passed between Travelers Tower and these later buildings, ceased to exist. Next time you pass by this section of Main Street, remember that where this building has stood since 1956 was once associated with such fascinating Hartford individuals as the enterprising female merchant Margaret Chenevard, the entrepreneurial bookseller, druggist, and banker Hezekiah Merrill, the active military and political figure General Nathan Johnson, the enterprising shirt maker H.W. Conklin, saloon owners F. Goodacre and Charles D. Scattergood, and many others, not least of whom was Alfred E. Burr, who led the Hartford Times from 1829 until 1890, and also his son, Willie O. Burr, who oversaw the sale of the Times property to the Travelers Insurance Company. Another person I want to mention is the great Art Deco muralist Hildreth Mier. She designed the marble mosaic fabricated at the Foscato factory in Long Island City, New York, entitled Travel in the Early Days of Travel Insurance, which was commissioned for the 1956 Travelers building and has been displayed in its lobby for almost 70 years. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe to the channel and check out my other videos. Thanks for watching.